नमस्कार, सत श्री अकाल, आदाब दोस्तों। वर्क मॉप द्वारा शुरू की गई कहानियों की इस खास मुहिम में आप सभी का तहे दिल से स्वागत है। दोस्तों, कहानियों के इस सिलसिले को आगे बढ़ाते हुए आइए बढ़ते हैं आज की अगली कहानी की ओर। जी हाँ, ये कहानी है नेहा खन्ना के जीवन के अनुभवों के बारे में। दोस्तों, आज आप जानेंगे नेहा खन्ना की सफलता की कहानी इनकी अपनी जुबानी। लेकिन इनसे मिलने से पहले आइए दोस्तों इनके बारे में कुछ खास बातें कर लें। आपको बता दें, नेहा खन्ना वो शख्सियत है जिन्होंने बेबाक पत्रकारिता की एक मिसाल पेश की है। टेलीविजन जर्नलिज्म फील्ड में 18 साल के अपने व्यापक अनुभव के साथ आज इन्होंने जिस तरह कड़ी मेहनत के दम पर अपनी पहचान बनाई है, वो हर किसी के बस की बात नहीं होती दोस्तों। एक बहुआयामी व्यक्तित्व की धनी है नेहा खन्ना और अब तक कई बड़े बड़े न्यूज नेटवर्क के साथ ये काम कर चुकी है। वर्तमान में इंडिया अहेड न्यूज चैनल दिल्ली में एग्जीक्यूटिव एडिटर के पद पर कार्यरत है। साथ ही चैनल के प्राइम टाइम शो की एंकरिंग भी करती है। सफलता का ये मुकाम हासिल करने के लिए इन्होंने कड़ी मेहनत की। आपको बता दें, नेहा खन्ना ने हमेशा से ही लाइफ में बहुत कुछ हासिल करने का सपना देखा था। बड़े बड़े सपने थे और उन सपनों को पूरा करने का जोश और जुनून भी भरपूर था। शुरुआत में इनकी एक आरजे बनने की चाह थी, लेकिन फिर इनकी दिलचस्पी मीडिया एंड जर्नलिज्म फील्ड की ओर बढ़ी। अपनी पढ़ाई पूरी करने के बाद इन्होंने इस फील्ड में प्रवेश किया और अपने सफर की शुरुआत की। आपको बता दें, इन्होंने एक रिपोर्टर, न्यूज एडिटर और प्राइम टाइम एंकर के रूप में 13 सालों तक एनडीटीवी के साथ काम किया और सोशल मीडिया ट्रेंड्स, लीगल, पॉलिटिकल हर क्षेत्र में बेहतरीन रिपोर्टिंग की। बतौर लीगल रिपोर्टर नेहा खन्ना ने ट्रायल कोर्ट, दिल्ली हाई कोर्ट और सुप्रीम कोर्ट में चल रहे कई हाई प्रोफाइल केसेस को कवर किया। सिर्फ यही नहीं, बल्कि इन्होंने यूपीए सरकार, कांग्रेस पार्टी और कई चुनावों को भी कवर किया। इसके अलावा ये कई बार प्राइम टाइम शो की एंकरिंग भी कर चुकी है और कई बड़े बड़े राजनेताओं, व्यवसायियों के इंटरव्यू भी इन्होंने लिए। दोस्तों, इस क्षेत्र में काफी कुछ अनुभव करने के बाद आज ये इस मुकाम पर पहुंची है। हालांकि अपने इतने वर्षों के कार्यकाल के दौरान इनके सामने कई चुनौतियां आई, लेकिन हमेशा अपने काम को इन्होंने प्राथमिकता पर रखा, कड़ी मेहनत की और हमेशा शांत मन से, समझदारी से उन तमाम चुनौतियों को पार किया और सफलता का ये मुकाम हासिल किया। जिस तरह नेहा खन्ना ने कड़ी मेहनत कर आज अपना एक वजूद स्थापित किया है, अपनी एक पहचान कायम की है, वो वाकई में सराहनीय है। इनके जज्बे और जुनून को हम भी सलाम करते हैं। इनकी सफलता तक पहुंचने की इस पूरी कहानी के बारे में जानने के लिए दोस्तों, आइए अब हम सीधा मिलते हैं नेहा खन्ना से और इनकी ये प्रेरक कहानी सुनते हैं सिर्फ और सिर्फ इनकी अपनी जुबानी।
Well, my name is Neha Khanna. I'm a television journalist for almost 18 years now. It's been a long. Currently, I am executive editor with India Ahead. I also anchor the 10 o'clock time show on the channel. Prior to this, in fact, I began my career with NDTV and I was for 13 long years. So that, I think, was a fantastic training ground for me. I think I have been fortunate and privileged enough to have had the opportunity to perform almost every editorial role that you can think of. I started out as a cub reporter covering everything from crime, the courts, waiting to covering politics and the government and various ministries. In India, we always have elections. So whether it's state elections, the national election, I was doing all for a very long time. I was an all-field reporter for close to 12 years. I began sometime towards the end of 2008. And I would like to believe I, rose through the ranks, and I'm privileged that I managed to, rise to a level where I have my own primetime show today. So I've had, the unique opportunities to perform these various editorial roles as an anchor, as a senior editor, because when you are in this sort of a position, then you're also involved in editorial decision making in the organization, especially when you have a lot of young people around you. So that does involve a fair bit of hand holding. But I would say 18 years, but still raring to go, so much to do. So let me begin by telling you that I am an out and out born and raised in Delhi. And I think one just gets so immersed in the culture of this city. It's a cosmopolitan city that gives you plenty of. So I think the exposure that I've had has been fantastic, especially given that this is the headquarters of the national media. It's very interesting. A lot of people say that the longest time, what they really want to do, right? But I think I have been very lucky in that regard, because I knew at a young age who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do with my life. Though there's a bit of a twist here somewhere, because there was a time in my teens when I was very fascinated by radios. A lot of these shows and popular RJs on Times FM, and a lot of people used to tell me in those days, you have a great, deep voice. And because I was very fascinated by what I saw these RJs doing, I thought at one point in my life that I wanted to be a radio jockey. But then I guess the television bug bit me, and it all started. I remember very distinctly when I was all of 15 in the 10th. Well, I think by that time, most kids are still struggling to figure out what stream of to in fact get into in the 11th grade. Most, are very unsure about what they really. I think I had a lot of clarity that I wanted to get into journalism. So the radio jockey dream was over by then. By then, I think the television dream, and that's because in that particular too, we had the country 24-hour television channel being launched. Back then it used news. So NDTV was then a production. Still, of course, the oldest media in the country, but they were in partnership and collaboration with Rupert Murdoch's Star News, which are just to India. So, this first 24-hour news channel in India burst, and you watch these people on doing something so absolutely fascinating you and captures you, bringing the news, big news of the day to the audience, day in and day out, night in and night out. And you realize, wait a minute, I think that is exactly what I want to do with my life. And, I got extraordinarily lucky, because the very people who I grew up watching, learning from and looking up to, almost hero worshipping and idolizing, are the people who I started my career with. These are the very people I got the fabulous opportunity to work with right at the beginning of my career. I was all of 22 when I began my career with it. I had finished my major in political science honors from Hindu College. Then I went to the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, where I studied radio and television journalism. Lucky, I guess, because that year to our Institute of Campus Placements, I was lucky that I was people in the entire batch to be recruited by NDTV, and there my television journey began right there. And like I said, it was a very long innings with NDTV, 13 years. An in-joke at NDTV that, those of us who began our career there and spent a long innings there, we are considered to be one born and brought up at NDTV. I can say with a lot of pride, because people like Dr. Prannoy Roy, Rajdeep Sardesai, Barkha Dutt, Srinivasan Jain, some of the biggest names, Ravish Kumar, of course, some of the biggest names in the Indian television news industry, some of the most respected journalists. These are people who were my colleagues, to learn from. So I would say I've been very lucky, because I really got to learn the best in the industry. And yeah, so I think it was the advent of 24/7 that made the picture at a very young age. I knew that I was hooked to television, and I knew that I wanted to do exactly what these guys did. It's been a very exciting journey. I think one word that probably summarizes it best would be that it's been a roller coaster ride. Um, I will be honest, it's not as if there are only highs. You also go through challenges. There are lows too. There are moments of self-doubt. There are moments when you feel, oh my God, can I, or can I go? The reason I say that is because you do encounter some very challenging situations along the way. I have been lucky that the opportunities that I think I need to help shape my career the way it has turned out over the last 8 years. But yes, it's a lot of hard work. Really want any young person who might be watching this to bear in mind, especially if they feel that they want to get. I think there are a couple of very important things they must bear in mind. I know it looks very glamorous to the outside world. People think it's all about being on TV. It's about being seen by people. People think it's about being famous or about makeup and looking good. No, there's so much more to what we do than just that. This is a teeny weeny part of the job. There's so much more to it. You have to undertake a very long journey. It's a long learning curve. You have to pick up a lot of skills on the way. You have to constantly learn on the job. Every single something new that you're learning, picking up some new, reading your skills all the time, constantly teaching yourself. I've always believed that journalism is not something that can really be taught in a class. It's not to say that I'm discouraging anyone from going to a journalism school. I visited myself, but I honestly believe that the best journalism that you on the job. And I'm a field reporter for over 11 years, and every day was exciting but also challenging. Could be when you're on the road covering, chasing, let's say, high-profile politicians, big election rally, traveling. You could be in the middle of a riot. You could be covering communal tension somewhere in some remote part of Uttar Pradesh or Haryana or Bihar. You could be covering a flood. You could be covering any natural catastrophe for that matter, the tsunami that happened, for example, in 2004. So as a journalist, you find yourself in those challenging situations as well all the time. If you are a reporter in the field, before you actually get to the stage of becoming an actor, that is the process that you go through. It's a lot of learning up along the way. So you teach yourself every single day. So I would say that there are two things that you need as absolute if you want to enter this profession and do well in this profession, that you've got to be willing to put in a lot of hard work. We don't have any, it's not a 9-to-5 job. I'm sure people are aware of that by now, but television news in particular, I can assure you, is not a 9-to-5 job. In the last 18 years, believe it or not, I have worked on most weeks. I have worked on a lot of national holidays and festivals. And there comes a point when you forget August is supposed to be a national holiday or Republic Day is supposed to be a national holiday because you're always at work. But then you don't complain because you enjoy what you do. So I would say get into the news business, get into journalism only if it truly drives you, only if you truly about it. About seeking fame, if it's just about finding something to do with your life, I would say look for other options. Maybe you will get paid better there, maybe it'll be more gratifying for you, but make sure that you get into the news business for the right reasons. Once you've established, maybe the glamour comes with it, with the territory, maybe a little bit of fame and recognition do come with the territory, but that is just a byproduct of what we do. So don't keep that at the heart of your ambitions. Make sure news is what drives you and news is what you're passionate about. You want to bring the big news story of the day to your viewers in capacity. And if that is what truly you're calling, then that's the only reason I think to be in journalism and to be in the news business. So that's that I think young people should really bear in mind. My journey, yes, there have been a lot of ups and downs. There are, like I said, days when you doubt yourself, when you wonder if you're doing this, because it's exacting. It's exacting at many levels, mentally, physically, emotionally. I think you've got to be really tough because you do find yourself in difficult situations. It's a very competitive industry, which is why you sometimes find yourself questioning yourself whether you have it in you, whether you can really go on doing this for the rest of your life. Because a lot of people who work in my industry will tell you the burnout rate is very high, the attrition rate is very high. It's not meant for everyone. Not everyone is cut out for this. You have to put in long hours. Like I said, you prepare to work on national holidays and festivals without complaining. There are occasions when there is breaking news and you work through the day and through the night. So I have woken up at 3 in the morning and come into work. And of course, I have been in office till 1 or 2 in the night, and I have been in office through the day and through the night on multiple occasions when there is a breaking news situation and a story that you can't move away from. So it is a lot of hard work. It does test you. It is taxing, but it's also rewarding. If you can sort of ride out those challenges, those hardships that will come with the territory, then you will also find that the profession is rewarding. That is why I think it's important to understand that you have to get into this profession only for the right reasons. Don't do it otherwise. For me, yes, it's interesting. I actually started out as an intern with NDTV. So I talked about how there were campus placements that year at IIMC when NDTV came visiting. And so my innings there actually began with a month-long internship. I wasn't even sure what was going to happen after that, but I was lucky that they hired me as a cub reporter, and that's how it all started. And those are 3 incredible years for me because I learned so much. I got a lot of opportunities, a lot of exposure. When you put in the effort, you realize you're getting better every day. I think there isn't a single editorial role that I did not get to perform, even in those 13 years, from being a reporter to working on the desk, writing scripts, editing your own stories. And yes, we were also taught how to work the camera. So there were some occasions when we also operated the camera, where we were also behind the camera and shot our own videos, filmed our own stories, and then were at the edit table for hours, putting together the final product before it went on air. So you get to learn those nuances, right? And those technical skills come in very, very handy. So you have to equip yourself not just with editorial skills, but also technical skills, especially if you want to be in the television or digital news space. That's very, very important. So we got to do all of that. I've worked on the desk. I have covered a whole lot of beats. I was a legal reporter for at least 8 years. I covered the courts, every trial court in Delhi, the High Court and the Supreme Court of India for a long time. A lot of people in those days used to jokingly tell me that I should probably consider an alternate career in law. So I think that was very exciting. And, legal reporting can be challenging because I'm not saying that it's all right to get your facts wrong in any other field of reporting. But if you're on the legal beat, you better be very careful of what you're reporting, because one wrong word here or there, one fact that you get wrong can get you and your organization into a lot of trouble, because it's the courts that you're talking about, and these are very sensitive matters. So luckily there was no such trouble for me, but I thoroughly enjoyed that. That was a great learning experience for me. Then I covered politics. I covered the Congress party, which was then the ruling party. I covered plenty of ministries, even though I was drawn more to legal and political reporting, but I realized as a journalist, especially in television, you really have to be a generalist, especially if you also go on to become a news anchor. And then, while at NDTV itself, I was doing primetime shows. Barkha used to do the Buck Stops Here weekend, the Buck Stops Here Monday to Friday. I used to do the Buck Stops Here weekend edition on Sundays. So it was a great learning curve, really. But like I said, you have to basically find along the way what it is that interests or excites you the most. But as a television journalist, I think you've also got to have the skill to be able to do a bit of everything. So now, when and it's been a few years now that I've had primetime shows of my own, and that essentially means you are discussing anything and everything under the sun, anything that is making news, that is making headlines in India or globally, is going to be your big discussion of the day on prime time. So if there's a war happening in Ukraine, that is your story, and you could be doing it for weeks together. I remember when Kabul fell to the Taliban on our Independence Day. Nobody had realized that would turn out to be the biggest story of the month, and we were completely focused on that. If there's an election happening in India, and we're always having elections in India, then of course that means you're talking about those elections, you're talking to politicians, you're talking about politicians, you're interviewing ministers and other netas. If of course, how can I forget the biggest story of the last 2 years, COVID, right? I mean, there hasn't been anything bigger than that since the beginning of the pandemic. And that is something that, again, we focused on in a big way. And that means a lot of effort, a lot of reading, a lot of research, because you're interviewing top medical and healthcare experts around the country and the world. I had the opportunity, I was very lucky to be able to interview Dr. Anthony Fauci. He is considered to be the world's foremost infectious diseases expert. And, so you've got to know your stuff, you've got to do your homework, you've got to know what you're talking about. So it does require a lot of effort, It's a legal story one day, a political story another day. It could be COVID the third day, and it could be a war the fourth day. And then there is suddenly the budget that's being presented on the 1st of February. And on that day, you have to focus on everything that ails the Indian economy, right? So it's funny, we wear a lot of hats, and one day we're economic experts, and another day we're war experts, and the third day we're COVID experts. I mean, that's just a little joke we have. So I always say that as journalists, you have to learn to be generalists. That's the challenge, and that's also the exciting part, right? So I think those are really the two sides of the coin. It's both challenging and exciting at the same time. And I think one of the highlights for me, especially in the last 1 year during my stint at India Head, has been the opportunity that I've had to interview some incredible people, both in India and abroad. Like I said, Dr. Anthony Fauci was just one of them. Just recently, I interviewed the Ukrainian envoy to India on the third day of Ukraine's invasion by Russia. Not an easy story to follow, but a story that the whole world is focused on right now. So I think that's a privilege you have as a journalist when you get to talk to newsmakers, and that experience really does widen your horizons. I'm someone who is passionate, comes across as being aggressive, and can sometimes be excitable too. So while that can be great if you're on TV, sometimes there is a flip side to it. So I think one of the most important lessons that I have learned over the years is how to try and stay calm when you're on air, especially when it's live TV. And we're always live on TV. By the way, we rarely do recorded shows. I can tell you, we're live 99% of the time. So whether it is a primetime discussion that you're doing on live television, or whether it is just a breaking news situation. So I think the ability to stay calm and composed, and to be able to tell yourself, it's all right, you can do this, you'll pull it off, you'll get through it. I think that is an incredibly important trait to have, which I learned over the years, for the simple reason that as a television anchor, you are more often than not thrown into the deep end, and you just have to figure out by yourself how to swim, right? And sinking is not an option. It's not. So you better learn how to swim. So, like I mentioned earlier, as a journalist, especially on TV and as an anchor in particular, there isn't a single story that you will, that will be out of the purview of what you do, as a professional. everything that is important to your viewers, everything that's making news, everything that is of news value has got to, is something that you've got to be familiar with. It's something that you've got to teach yourself about. It's something that you've got to learn to talk about and even educate your viewers about. Now, you may feel, oh my God, I've never covered a war in my life, but you're in a situation where there is a war raging and you have to inform your viewers about it, which means it's extremely important that you first educate yourself before you can actually inform your viewers, right? So it's a lot of learning, constant learning on the job. It's a lot of thinking on your feet. There are a lot of situations where you have, and I'm not exaggerating, one line of information. Something has happened somewhere. It could be a bomb blast somewhere. It could be violence that has erupted somewhere. It could be just news that Russia has just invaded Ukraine. Now, you have one line of information because it's just happened and you're on air, and it is your job to inform the viewers as best as you can. And guess what? It's such a big story, you can't move away from it. You can't say, all right, so we've told you that Russia has just invaded Ukraine, but we're waiting for more details, so let's now move on to what's happening in Uttar Pradesh. No, you can't do that. If it's the biggest story of that moment, then you've got to stay on that story. And so the biggest challenge is, how do I stay on the story without making a fool of myself on live television? How do I keep myself updated on the developments that are happening somewhere far away while I'm trying to keep my viewers informed every minute and every second, right? And there are no inputs available at that moment. There's no reporter there on the ground. There are no sound bites that you can play to play for time. None of that. It's just you on TV, and your audience, and you figure out how to keep them informed, even with that teeny weeny bit of information that you have, without making a fool of yourself. That can be tough, especially if it's an area that you're not particularly familiar with, or if it's a situation, like I said, which is evolving, about which very little information is available, but it's a story you cannot move away from. So I think earlier on, maybe when I just began anchoring, maybe there were moments when I would get nervous or agitated and wondered what to do, but over time, I think you just realize that, look, this is how it is. This is the nature of the beast. You've got to just learn to stay calm and go with the flow and make the best of that situation. So that's one of the biggest learnings, really, has been one of the biggest learnings for me. As for mistakes, let's face it, if you're doing live TV, you make mistakes, period. Whether you like it or not, you may think you're the most competent person in the world, but you will make mistakes because it's only human. You're live on TV for several hours. We all make bloopers, trust me on that. Some, I guess, get noticed by the viewers, others not so much, thank God for that. But I don't know of a single television journalist, however seasoned they might be, who've not made bloopers on air. It could be something as small as, something that is meant to be heard just by your director in the PCR, the production control room, actually going on air. I think a lot of anchors do that. I have done that plenty of times, especially if it's an agitated conversation and you're like, oh my God, what's going on, guys? Tell me. And suddenly, next thing you know, that actually went on air and the viewers heard it. That happens because there is a lot happening behind the scenes, which people cannot imagine. In a breaking news situation, the newsroom can be a very, very chaotic place. So there's a lot happening behind the scenes that the viewers aren't aware of. Talking about some of the other mistakes and bloopers that we made, let's say getting the name of a minister wrong. Because in that one moment, the director is telling you it is XYZ, somebody else is speaking in your ear and saying it's actually ABC, and next thing you know, you're introducing your guest incorrectly. So those things happen. By and large, be careful with facts, because remember, I think the toughest part, and I really mean it when I say this, the toughest part, I think, today about being a TV journalist is that we're in the digital age, we're in the social media age. So while till a few years ago, you could get away with a lot of mistakes, now it is extremely difficult because, one mistake here, one blooper there, somebody makes a little video clip of it and posts it on Twitter. Next thing you know, you're a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons, something you don't want to be. So, and then the kind of trolling that happens, the kind of trolling that we're subjected to. That happens to the best of us. It happens even when we think we're doing our job to the best of our ability, because various issues, different political parties have their troll armies for ideological reasons, for all sorts of reasons. Journalists get routinely trolled, but it gets so much worse if you've actually made an error on television. Then people are very unforgiving, So I think this is a new challenge that that has emerged for us television anchors in recent years, which probably didn't exist to the same extent till 5, 6, 7 years ago. So yes, I think that is one of the biggest challenges today of being a television anchor, doing live television, that somebody or the other might catch that one little mistake you make and make you regret it bitterly, because people will have a lot to say to you on the social media. And it's just human to make mistakes, sometimes just embarrassing little bloopers, sometimes to get a few facts wrong, because you have so little time to process the information that's just come in to you. You're not even sure. Let's say, for example, Ukraine has just been attacked, and the city that's actually being bombed right now is Kharkiv, but you're not sure of those facts. Somebody just tells you in your ear that it's Kiev, the capital. You go ahead and say Kiev is under attack, and that could be completely wrong, but you're going to be people on social media will make sure that you do not forget that you made that error. So, of course, you have to be responsible with facts as much as possible. It is a responsibility you have. You can't play around with facts. So I'm not saying for a moment that it's all right to play around with facts. All I'm saying is it is human to make mistakes when you're live on TV, but people tend to be far less forgiving nowadays on the social media than was the case earlier. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges that you face. And I think that has been a huge learning experience for all of us, regardless of whether somebody's just come into the industry in the last couple of years or whether it's somebody who's been here for over a decade like me. It's really a new learning, I think, for all of us. We're realizing there's a whole new dimension to what we do. Let me see. I think I am a very passionate person who has very strong convictions too. And I think my convictions have, really played a big part in my profession and have, helped me along my journey in a big way. And you mentioned instinct. Yes, I think instincts come in very handy when you're in this profession, because sometimes you have to take decisions in seconds. Sometimes you have debates in the newsrooms with your editors for hours on what story to take up, to highlight on your primetime show that day. There are, let's say, 5 different things that have happened. A politician has kicked up a big controversy by making some hugely offensive statement, let's say, to women or to a certain caste community. On the other hand, there is a story of some major violence that has erupted somewhere. The third could actually be, Shane Warne dying the other day, something that happened just 2 days ago, right? A legend of the game suddenly dying of a heart attack at the age of 52. It was shocking for all cricket fans. But remember, that was also a time when a war is raging in Ukraine, and also when Uttar Pradesh is voting, right? So these are very, very tough decisions to make. And sometimes you have to change your agenda at the last minute. You had decided you were going to discuss Ukraine because that's what you've been focusing on for 12 consecutive days, but suddenly comes in this really big story of a cricket legend having an untimely death. And you know that it means a lot to cricket lovers in your country and around the world. And then you end up changing that agenda. That's exactly what I did just a couple of days ago. Yes, I think instinct and your convictions play a big part. Sometimes you have to make a forceful argument and a strong case for a certain story that you believe in. Maybe your editor, your boss is not as convinced as you are that this story is important and deserves to be told. But if you have the courage of your convictions, you're willing to put up a fight for something that you believe in and are able to convince your editor, well, then, it can be a very rewarding experience. If I were to give you one example, from very recent times, there was this very unfortunate incident that happened in Haridwar where a lot of hate speeches were made at a so-called Dharm Sansad, targeting the minority community, targeting Muslims. And, for the longest time, there were these videos that were going viral on the social media, but nobody in the mainstream media was somehow willing to pick it up for reasons best known to them. And I remember going to my editor that day and saying, look, this video is circulating on the social media, and I have heard some of these speeches, and they're absolutely disgusting and obnoxious. And to think this is happening publicly in 21st century India, where so-called religious leaders belonging to the majority community are openly calling for the genocide of a minority community, and they're being filmed, and they seem to be very proud of what they're doing, and they know that this is going viral on social media, and they don't seem to care. Maybe it caters to their constituency, but can we just stand by and watch and let this happen and not question it? I mean, I can't physically go there and stop those guys from making those speeches, but as a journalist, is it not my responsibility to say this is not on? This is a hate speech. This amounts to incitement to violence. You're actually calling upon members of the majority community to take up arms against the minorities. You're calling for a genocide. Is this something that you can ignore? No, you cannot. I remember we had a debate about this, and I felt extremely strongly about the story, and I am so glad and lucky that my editor agreed with me. My editor agreed that this was a story that deserved to be told, that deserved space on prime time. And I think I can say very proudly that for the first 2 days, while almost no one else in mainstream media, whether print or television, thought it was worth their while to pick up this story, we at India Ahead took a conscious decision, an editorial decision, that we needed to highlight what was happening, that things were going absolutely too far, and these people needed to be called out. So, the kind of feedback that we got was so overwhelming. I mean, obviously, when you're going in thinking, I want to do this, you're not thinking about the outcome. You're not thinking about what response you may or may not get. It's not even something you can predict, right? You're going in there because you have the courage of your convictions. You believe this is a story that needs to be told. You believe that you need to shout from the rooftops and tell these people to, pipe down and tell them that this cannot be allowed in 21st century India. I mean, we're the largest democracy in the world, for God's sake, and you're calling for the genocide of fellow Indians, 20% of the population. This cannot be allowed to go unchallenged. You go in just with that conviction. And I picked up that story. We did, 2 or 3 primetime shows on it consecutively. And I remember the kind of feedback, and this was just in the month of December last year, the kind of feedback that I got was overwhelming on the social media. It was absolutely overwhelming. And, I don't want to get into a very self-congratulatory mode here, but one of the things that I heard so many people tell me, that so many people wrote, to me and about my shows, was that this comes not just as a breath of fresh air, but as a very reassuring sign that journalism in this country is not dead. Because I am mindful of the fact that I belong to an industry which has unfortunately left a lot of people very disillusioned. I am fully mindful of that. And I feel all of us need to take a certain degree of responsibility for what's happened to our industry. It's a profession that is much loved, revered, and respected till not too long ago. And I am not, what shall I say? It's not something I'm proud of. It's something that I'm almost embarrassed to say, that now we've come to a point where a lot of people will tell you we don't take journalists seriously anymore. We don't take the news business seriously anymore. It's lost its credibility. I know that there are bad apples everywhere. But unfortunately, the bad apples in our industry seem to have, created such strong perceptions about our industry that people seem to think that most of us have forgotten how to do our job. The haters go to the extent of saying we're all sold out, and that hurts. Especially when you know that you're not one of them and that you're still trying to do an honest job as a journalist, but the credibility of the profession itself is called into question every day, especially on the social media. It's not easy, and I think that's where a lot of the hate directed at journalists comes from. That's where a lot of the trolling originates from, some of which one can understand, because I'm as disillusioned with that brand of journalism as these people are. So I don't blame them for feeling the way they do, because this is not the kind of journalism that I set out to do. This is not the kind of brand of journalism that I was ever taught. What we are witnessing in large sections of the media, honestly, is disturbing, even for me. And that is why I think it was so gratifying when I heard so many people tell me, and when I read those comments about how your shows have appeared as a beacon of hope, that this is reassuring. It tells us that journalism is not dead. There are still people who have a conscience and a spine, who are willing to call a spade, who are willing to speak truth to power, something that they feel that journalists don't do in this country anymore. So I think that kind of feedback was very, very overwhelming for me, because I had no idea that this is what that one decision I had taken to do those shows would actually lead to. So I think it was very humbling, very overwhelming, and also an eye-opener, because it was not just reassuring for my viewers, it was reassuring for me as a journalist, because it reminded me that I'm on the right track. I don't know how many people are watching me, because unfortunately, it's those who make the most noise who also seem to grab the most eyeballs, right? But this is reassuring. It tells you that you are on the right track, you are doing the right thing, the right kind of journalism, and that you must stay the course. But before I conclude that answer, I want to say this to people watching this, that I'm not saying for a moment that journalists are not responsible for the loss of credibility that this profession has suffered. A lot of us, I think a lot of people in my fraternity definitely need to take responsibility for a lot of that. But I think some responsibility also lies with the viewers, because at the end of the day, you have something called a remote in your hand, right? If you're watching TV and flipping through channels, or if you're consuming your news content online on your phone or your other gadgets, you have a choice to make. And as a viewer, as a news consumer, you can decide what kind of news content you want to consume, which channels you want to watch. So if you feel that there are certain networks that are just, making a lot of noise, that are promoting hate, that are pitting one section of Indians against another, who are not doing an honest job as journalists, well then stop watching them. Instead of whining constantly about how journalism has plumbed the depths, just stop watching those guys. Watch people who are still doing sensible, meaningful, noiseless journalism, right? There are still some of us who are trying to do our bit, so support us. Instead of constantly whining about the kind of journalism that you don't wish to watch, and yet you're watching them night after night, and they continue to grab your attention, and they feel that they're doing exactly what needs to be done. So you as a viewer also have a responsibility. I have to first begin by agreeing with some very important points that you've made. Let me start by saying that I'm not going to whitewash the sins of some of my colleagues. I am embarrassed, honestly, to see a certain brand of journalism that seems to have taken center stage in the last few years, because like I said earlier, that's not the brand of journalism that I was ever trained in. That's not the brand of journalism I ever set out to do. Clearly, the world has changed a lot since I began my career 17, 18 years ago. So the cacophony, the noise, the shameless war for TRPs, pitting Indians against Indians, encouraging hate, a lot of minority bashing that also happens on Indian television these days. A lot is going wrong with our industry. I will make no bones about it. I am embarrassed about this kind of journalism, but I will not brush it under the carpet. I will say that yes, this is the reality of Indian television news industry today, whether we like it or not. We cannot shy away from it. In fact, I think we need to confront it, right? We need to acknowledge that this is a problem, and we need to do something about it, because this is the reason why we are fast losing our credibility as a fraternity, despite, as you said, being the fourth pillar of democracy, despite the fact that this used to be a very respected and loved and revered profession. Why is that not the case anymore? Why do journalists get so much hate, get trolled so much? I think a lot of that is to do with this new branded journalism that has emerged in recent years, which I'm not proud of at all. And you made another very interesting point. When I started out as a journalist, even I was told, when I was undergoing my basic training, that your job as a journalist is to report the news. And the one thing that we were always advised against doing was to editorialize. I remember this word being used a lot in our editorial meetings, our bosses telling us, tell the story without becoming a part of the story. Nowadays, of course, you have the journalists themselves becoming the story, which also I think is pretty embarrassing and frankly disrespectful to the profession. But we were always told, keep your opinions out or aside. Just tell the story like it is. Report both sides or all sides, because there are always several versions of truth, right? There is no such thing as black or white. Life, as we know, unfolds in the gray zones, right? So there are always so many versions of truth. Your job, we were told as reporters, as young journalists, was to report all versions of a story and then leave it for the viewer to make up his or her own mind, to draw their own conclusions. So we were always told, do not editorialize. Unfortunately, over the years, we've taken a 180-degree turn on that basic principle of journalism, where there is much more editorializing happening than actually news presentation, where there is much more opinion rather than facts being presented before the viewers. It's happening much more, I think, in television than anywhere else. Of course, newspapers have a certain space for opinions, but that's the edit page or the op-ed page. At least it's marked, it's labeled, you know what you're going to get there. Unfortunately, on television, there is no labeling, right? So you don't know after a point whether what the anchor has just told you is a fact or just their opinion, right? So those lines blur very easily on television. And I think that is unfortunate, because I could be a very opinionated person. I may have strong opinions on everything. And as thinking individuals, we all have strong opinions, right? Nothing wrong with that. But it is really not fair if I start trusting my opinions, personal opinions on my viewers, and try to disguise those as facts or as the real story. That I think would be tantamount to cheating, to dishonesty, and to betraying the trust of your viewers who are tuning into your show in the hope that you will tell them what's actually going on, the ground reality. A lot of news presentation, unfortunately, these days is getting colored by anchors' personal, not just opinions, but biases, very deep-rooted prejudices in a lot of cases. And that is dangerous. It's not just embarrassing, for us as journalists. I think it's downright dangerous for the country, because, as you mentioned there, we journalists have an important role to play, and It is our job to hold the powers that be to account, to speak truth to them, to ask them uncomfortable questions. And when we stop doing our job as journalists and become cheerleaders for somebody, mouthpieces for somebody, or when we decide for our viewers whose side they should be on, we're just being downright dishonest with our jobs as journalists. That is something I have always been uncomfortable with. There are plenty of people who are doing that. That's not the kind of journalism I have ever practiced. Yes, there are times, I will not deny, when you feel so strongly about an issue and you feel that issue is so powerful, so important to discuss, where while you're presenting facts, you may also allow yourself the liberty to maybe express your views just a little bit, so as to maybe just tell the viewers where you as a journalist and anchor stand on that story. Again, if I could take you back to the example of the Haridwar hate speeches. Did I present the facts to the viewers of exactly what had happened at that event? Yes, I did. Did I also tell them that I thought it was absolutely revolting and dangerous for our democracy? If this is the direction that we're headed in, yes, I also did that. Can I be accused of editorializing there? Maybe. Am I ashamed of it? No, I'm not. You know what I mean? So it may be a thin line somewhere in some cases, but as long as you are convinced about what you're doing and convinced that you're doing your job honestly, then I think it is fine. A little bit of editorializing where you're trying to drive home a point, where you're trying to maybe make your viewers aware of the gravity of something. I think a little bit of editorializing there is fine. Like, for example, if somebody is openly calling for someone's killing or a genocide, I think it is all right to feel agitated and angry on television and to say, this is not on, we can't let this happen in our India. And I will honestly tell you, I have done that as a journalist. And it's not something that I would shy away from, even in the future. But do I tell anyone which political party to vote for? Which party is good or bad for this country? No, that is not journalism. That is not my job. Let the viewers make up their minds. We can talk about what's been done and not been done in Uttar Pradesh for the last 5 years, and let the viewers make up their own minds about whether the incumbent government has done a good enough job to deserve a second term or not, right? So it all depends on the situation, really. But yes, I think it's best that we 99% of the time keep our opinions to ourselves, maybe share them with our loved ones, friends, families, in drawing room conversations, but leave them out of the studio. I think that is very important, if we have to be honest with our viewers. Yeah, I think that's very well put. It's really a battle for your sanity more often than not, right? Because you're in this pressure cooker situation all the time, being a journalist, being in the television industry in particular, and like I said, the added pressures of social media constantly tracking your every move and calling you out for every little mistake that you make, and the very competitive nature of our profession. So it is a pressure cooker situation most of the time. It's a very, very high pressure job. The stress levels are almost always at stratospheric levels. Live television, like I said, can be very demanding. You're constantly on your toes. It's not just physically taxing, it's mentally taxing too. And I think for a journalist, it's actually very difficult to completely switch off. I'll be honest with you. There are times when I try really hard when I'm on a vacation to completely switch off, but it's very, very hard because I think you just get programmed, conditioned to following the news so closely all the time that it's hard to completely switch off. But I think for the sake of your sanity, it's important to detox and to switch off once in a while. So what do I like to do to de-stress? A lot of things. For the sake of your sanity more than anything else, you need the company and the love and the support of your family and your friends, as cliched as it may sound, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like most days you've been in a war zone and you get back home and you're like, all right, this is my refuge. So I think spending time with family, that keeps you grounded, that helps you keep your sanity. That's very important. And some close friends who you meet up with whenever work permits. I love to travel. Again, don't get to do as much of it as I would love to, but it is something that I think has always been a big priority for me. Love to travel, love listening to music. It's very de-stressing for me, and it's something that you can do very easily. I mean, it's on your phone, not like a holiday for which you need to take time off work necessarily and make big elaborate plans, right? So I listen to a lot of music. I am a bit of a Netflix addict, I must admit. Yes, I think I do binge watch a lot of shows on Netflix. I watch movies. I used to watch more movies earlier. Now I think it's more of these American and British dramas that you get on these OTT platforms. I like to read. Again, not as much as I would want to for paucity of time. But yeah, and I'm a foodaholic. I'm sure you can tell just looking at me. And my Punjabi genes don't help there. When you've grown up in an environment where people are constantly talking about food, yes, food is a big part of my life. So I absolutely love digging into good food. So yeah, all of that, friends, family, music, travel, great shows. I would love to meditate. I don't do that though. I'll be honest. A lot of people will tell you, a lot of well-wishers will tell you, you're in this high-pressure job, you must meditate. I haven't got around to doing that yet. Maybe I will going forward. Who knows? I think, honestly, what keeps me going more than anything else is my dream and passion. I know, again, it sounds very cliched, right? Probably everyone says that. But it is true. When you've had a certain dream from a young age, like I told you, I was all of 15 when I decided I wanted to be a journalist. So when you've had a dream since a young age, I think that is the one single biggest factor that keeps you going, especially on the tough days. And believe me, there are plenty of tough days in this profession. Plenty of tough days where you're, tired, where you're exhausted, where you're frustrated because things didn't go your way, where you're unhappy, where you wonder if you've had enough and you want to quit. But yes, it is your dreams that keep you going, because I think after a point when you learn to look at the big picture, and yeah, I think this is some great advice that I got from a colleague a few years ago. Learn to focus on the big picture, because a lot of times and I'm talking about myself here more than anyone else, we tend to get bogged down by tiny little things which we magnify so much in our heads that at that moment they seem to be so big. 5 days later, a month later, you look back and you realize how insignificant, how almost irrelevant those issues were. So I remember a senior colleague of mine telling me, always focus on the big picture, because that helps you focus, that helps you prioritize, that helps you separate the wheat from the chaff, that helps you realize that this is stuff which I need not focus on, which does not deserve my bandwidth. We all have limited bandwidth. So it is my larger goals that I need to dedicate my bandwidth to, rather than focus on these little pinpricks, which will happen, which will be a part of your daily life. Somebody said something to you which you did not like, something you wanted to do which you didn't get to do. An uncomplimentary remark somewhere, an argument with somebody. It could be anything at all. Or maybe the boss said something that you were not particularly pleased with. So we tend to get bogged down by those things. I know I do. But I remember my senior colleague's advice that if you can focus on the big picture, you will know that the rest is just noise and it just doesn't matter. And I think there having a tunnel vision also helps. It may sound a little contradictory, but I think the two do go together in some ways. If you know what the big picture looks like in your life. And if you can work towards your goals with a tunnel vision, then I think that really does help. Plus, I think another important mantra I've learned is, you tend to hyperventilate a lot in this profession. I know I do. But you learn after a point when you grow up that, it's all right. Just calm down. You'll survive. You had a tough day. Maybe you had a bad show. A guest gave you a difficult time. Something went wrong, and you feel miserable and you question yourself. But if you can just tell yourself at the end of the day, it's all right. You will survive. Tomorrow's another day, and maybe there are some great surprises in store for you. So just take it easy. These little things don't matter. Just focus on the bigger goals, and those are the issues that really you need to be focusing your limited bandwidth on. So I think those are some mantras that have helped me keep my sanity, and that also keep me going, knowing what I ultimately want from life, and just focusing on that.
दोस्तों, ये थी इंडिया अहेड न्यूज चैनल की एग्जीक्यूटिव एडिटर नेहा खन्ना की कहानी, इनकी अपनी जुबानी। ऐसी ही प्रेरक कहानियां रोजाना सुनने के लिए हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें और बेल आइकन जरूर दबाएं। और दोस्तों, अगर आज की ये कहानी आपको पसंद आई है तो इसे लाइक, कमेंट और शेयर करना ना भूलें। जी हाँ दोस्तों, वर्क मॉब आपको दे रहा है एक सुनहरा मौका अपने विचारों को व्यक्त करने का, अपने अनुभवों को साझा करने का और अपने जीवन की कहानी देशवासियों तक पहुंचाने का। तो आइए और जुड़िए आप भी इस मुहिम में हमारे साथ और अपनी कहानी से दीजिए सभी को एक नई प्रेरणा। लेट्स इंस्पायर टुगेदर, वी कैन, इंडिया कैन। जी हाँ, आपकी कहानी में ताकत है लोगों का जीवन बदलने की। तो सुनाइए अपनी कहानी और ले आइए लोगों के जीवन में आशा की एक नई किरण। कीजिए सभी को इंस्पायर। फिलहाल वक्त तो चला है आप सभी से इजाजत लेने का, लेकिन बहुत जल्द एक बार फिर होंगे हाजिर एक नई कहानी के साथ। तब तक के लिए आप बने रहिए हमारे साथ, देखते रहिए कहानियों का हमारा ये खास कार्यक्रम और लीजिए हर नई कहानी से हर दिन एक नई और सच्ची प्रेरणा। नमस्कार।